Hi, welcome back. Are you looking to add drama and detail to your art? In this tutorial, we'll draw an eye with a teardrop using easy charcoal techniques and without a grid method. So let's get started. As always, these are the art supplies I'm going to use for this drawing, and you can pause the video right here to note them down. I'm using this A3 size paper from my toned grey mixed media paper pad, and the drawing portion area is 11 cross 14 inches. Some of you find the grid method a bit tricky, so this time I'm using a much simpler approach. It's called the X plus Y outline technique, where we only use one horizontal and one vertical line to divide the paper into 4 parts. I'm starting by placing my scale horizontally and marking the center point using a B pencil, which in this case is at 7 inches, since the total width of the paper is 14 inches. This vertical mark becomes our y-axis. Then I turn the scale vertically. The full height of my paper is 11 inches. So I am marking a point at 5 inches from the top to create a division in a 5 by 6 ratio. I'm repeating the same 5-inch marking on the right side as well. This horizontal line becomes our x-axis. Once all 4 markings are in place, I'm joining them together using straight lines. This divides the drawing paper into 4 equal sections. Now with both axes in place, we've created a clean intersection point at the center of the paper that will guide our proportions. Now it's time to define the proportions of the eye inside this layout. Starting with the right section, I placed my scale along it and made a mark at the 0.5 inch point. This will help position the pupil. Next, I am marking at the 2 inch point, which will act as a guide for the outer edge of the iris. To set the end of the eye shape, I am marking at 4 inches. And then adding a final mark at 5.5 inches to locate the lid fold portion. I am following the exact same process on the left side to mirror the proportions. Okay, so moving on to the vertical section at the bottom, and I'm placing the scale on this line. I actually forgot to add the 0.5 inch mark here at first and had to add it later, but you can mark it right away by measuring from the intersection point. After that, I marked another point at the 2 inch position on the scale. Then for the third point, I'm making a mark at 3.5 inches. Finally, I'm repeating the same vertical marking process on the top section as well to keep everything proportionate. And just like that, the X plus Y outline technique gives us a structured base without the clutter of a full grid, making it easier to focus on the actual drawing. Now let's start tracing the circle by adding small curved strokes to mimic the shape of the pupil. I'm using the medium gold Faber charcoal pencil by Faber-Castell and filling in the entire pupil thoroughly, keeping the pressure high to achieve a rich black tone. If you have soft, medium and hard charcoal pencils, you can use the soft one for pitch black areas and the hard one where you need lighter shading or more defined strokes, like for outlines or eyelashes. But if you don't have all 3, don't worry. You can easily use just the medium pencil and get the same results by adjusting your pressure, just like I'll be doing in this drawing. And by the way, you can get access to our premium content and support this channel through Patreon. You can sign up through different membership levels and get access to all the outline and grid references, etc. We have an ever-growing library of hundreds of exclusive and real-time tutorials, and you will also get access to 4 new tutorials every month. You can also post your artworks in our active community of patrons and participate in our weekly critique sessions where I give my honest and positive critiques on your artworks. So you can improve your skills and get better with your drawing. Visit the link in description and become a premium member today. It has always been my goal to provide free tutorials and information on drawing and art-related tools to the general public. And keeping with that theme, I like to thank all these incredible individuals who backed our channel on Patreon last month. Their generous support enabled me to produce this free tutorial for all of you guys. Now start shaping the iris by connecting the 2 inch markings to build your circle. I'm first adding an arc in one quadrant and then continuing it into the next to gradually complete the circle. Keep layering and adjusting its shape until it looks balanced and smooth. I'm also adding this rectangular shape to represent the light reflection in the iris. Now let's begin building the 3D base. For that, I'm adding small strokes and shapes for the iris texture, following along the natural curve inside the iris. I've also drawn this same eye using graphite pencils inside my signature drawing course on Udemy. In the course, you'll find this eye along with many other lessons, covering everything from basic to advanced lessons, techniques, tips and tricks, which I have developed over years of trial and error. I recently upgraded the course with over 30 hours of bonus content, including portrait basics, and it's currently one of the top-rated drawing courses on Udemy. Every month, I open a 5-day sale just for my YouTube family, and the first 50 students can join at up to 90% off. Check the link in description to see if the sale is going on right now, and get enrolled before it ends. Once these main strokes are in place, start extending the iris outline inward with slight waves to create a natural, wavy texture. Now start filling the iris with straight strokes placed close together, keeping the pressure low. You'll notice I'm following the curve of the iris and filling it densely with these directional strokes. For the upper portion, I'm placing the strokes even closer together to build more depth. Keep adding these texture lines, some lighter, some darker, to get the perfect base. Now let's move on to blending, and for that I'm using my blending stump. And starting at the edge of the iris, blending the darker areas inwards using small back and forth motions. Then I'm blending the lighter areas of the iris using the same blending stump, but with a clean tip to avoid over darkening and patchiness. You'll see a lot of charcoal powder has been collected, and to clean it up, I'm using a blower. But you can simply blow it off gently with your mouth for a clean surface. Okay, so now it's time for the highlighting, and for that, I'm using my white pastel pencil by Faber-Castell. I have started by adding these small straight strokes. Keeping the pressure low, I'm only going over the lighter areas in between the darker strokes and adding these highlights close together. I'm also increasing the pressure while adding these curved strokes right beside these darker shapes. Keep on flicking your pencil to add this line texture, but make sure to use variable pressure. Apply higher pressure where you want brighter highlights and reduce it to achieve softer strokes. When working over a rich black 3D base like this, the white pastel pencil can be your best tool for achieving hyper-realistic iris texture. The trick is to layer your white highlights gently over the darker textures already in place. This contrast makes the lines pop and appear naturally reflective. Use light pressure for web-like patterns, stronger strokes for defined highlights, and mix in circular or scribbled motions to break the uniformity. And always make sure your pastel tip is sharp. This ensures clean, crisp marks that mimic the fibrous texture of a real iris. Even with one pencil, you can create multiple depths, simply by how you control pressure and stroke direction. Now I'm moving my hand in small circular motions, keeping the pressure very low near the edges to achieve the required fibrous texture of the iris. Keep on adding these small strokes, lines, and scribble patterns for the whole iris portion. Just make sure to keep the reference image in mind to ensure you're staying on track. You can also layer these highlights on areas that are looking less bright, just like the way I'm doing here. I'm also adjusting the depth around the pupil by flicking my charcoal pencil all along the edge. And look how defined and crisp it has started to look. Now let's fill this reflection portion thoroughly using a white pastel pencil. I'm keeping the pressure on my pencil high to achieve a dense white base. Some of the highlights in the iris are still looking dull to me, so I'm adding another layer over the previous strokes where required. You can skip this step if your highlights are already as bright as we need here. Okay, so now let's make these highlights even more crisp and bright. And for that, I love to add these dark strokes right beside the lighter ones. This will clean up the messy edge along with adding the required depth. This contrast trick gives the highlights a realistic touch by making them appear slightly raised, almost like the light is bouncing right off the surface. It's a simple but powerful way to fake the illusion of depth using nothing but contrast. Now it's time to add the lashes reflection in this white portion of the iris we defined earlier. And for that, I have created a sharp tip of my pencil by rubbing it on sandpaper. Now I'm adding these small curved strokes to mimic the shape of the eyelashes. I'm keeping their length and direction random, as too much uniformity in this texture makes the drawing look flat instead of realistic. One helpful trick is to think of eyelash reflections as soft shadows. Make some strokes longer, some shorter, and vary their angle slightly to keep things natural. You can also cluster a few strokes together to suggest denser lashes, or leave more space where the lash gaps are. Also notice I'm adding a few thicker strokes, keeping the pressure high, and a few thinner strokes to achieve a natural look. Due to the white base, the black isn't looking as intense as required here. So I am carefully going over the lash strokes again to achieve the required darkness. And look how clean and crisp the lashes have started to look. I'm also adjusting the depth around this light reflection we created using the same charcoal pencil. The upper portion of the iris also has a light and lashes reflection. And to mimic such an effect, I'm adding these small dots of random sizes in an arc form all along this upper portion. The highlights in the center are looking a bit too long and wide to me, so I'm adjusting them by going in between them. This will alter their size along with toning them down a bit. I'm also creating another small arc right above it by using the same white pastel pencil. Now I'm adding these small cuts in this arc using a charcoal pencil to achieve the required dotted irregular line. I wasn't satisfied with the highlights in the center portion, so I'm layering black over them and adding these dots of relatively smaller size using a white pastel. Okay, so now let's adjust the iris by erasing its bottom and top portions using a mono zero eraser. I'm also going back and retouching the darker details and highlights until I'm satisfied with the texture. Now it's time to add the arc reflection at the bottom portion of the iris, and I'm following the same method. First adding a white arc using my pastel pencil and then cutting into it with a charcoal pencil to break it up naturally. Okay, so let's start drawing the shape of the eye, and for that I am marking at 1 inch on both the left and right side by placing my scale horizontally on this 5.5 inch marking on the x-axis. Now starting from this point, I'm adding a curved stroke extending towards the top portion of the iris. I'm also adding another curved stroke to define the lower lash line of the eye. Now add another arc starting from the 3.5 inch mark on the y-axis and extend it leftwards till it touches the 5.5 inch mark on the x-axis. Notice that I'm keeping the angle on my pencil very low to avoid harsh strokes. Okay, so now that we have a basic shape in this quadrant, let's add a base layer in it. And for that, I'm using the same charcoal pencil but with variable pressure. I'm keeping the pressure low and shading the areas that I want relatively lighter and then gradually increasing the pressure to darken the folds and lines. I'm also shading the sclera, keeping the pressure low. Okay, so let's blend this layer thoroughly, and as always, I'm using my blending stump and going over this whole area. I'm starting from the lighter portion, which is the sclera, and moving upwards. Also notice that I'm using back and forth motions to effectively blend this layer. Okay, so the sclera is looking a bit flat to me. So now I'm using my white pastel and adding this very soft layer using circular scribbling motion. Now it's time to blend, and I'm using my finger and going over it. I'm also adjusting the depth along the upper portion of the sclera by using the excess charcoal from the dirty side of the blending stump. I'm adding another layer of white pastel over the sclera to achieve the required base. The outline of the upper lid and tear duct faded away, so I'm adjusting it by using my sharp-tipped charcoal pencil. And look how these highlights and shadows made the sclera look 3D. Now to add some dimension to the tear duct, I'm layering white using the same circular scribbling motions. Now let's blend this area to achieve a smooth base. I wasn't satisfied with the brightness of the sclera near the iris, so I am again layering white pastel, keeping the pressure low and blending it afterwards. Okay, so moving on to the upper eyelid portion, I am following the similar method of layering white first in this lighter portion and then blending it using my finger to achieve an even base. I'm also adjusting the depth on the eye fold by layering charcoal and blending it afterwards. The lash line is looking a bit flat to me, so I'm adding this soft curved stroke right above the darker one and blending it afterwards. These small adjustments may seem minor, but they are incredibly important when working on realistic drawings. It's these subtle transitions and refined shadows that bring volume and realism to your artwork. Without them, the drawing might look flat or unfinished. So always take your time with these little details. Okay, so now it's time to add the skin texture, and for that, firstly, make sure the tip of your white pencil is sharp and long with a rounded tip. Now by keeping the angle very low, almost parallel to the paper, start moving your hand in small back and forth motions, and you'll see the blended texture has started to form. Keep moving your hand and add this texture, keeping the pressure variable for this whole light portion. Try not to overlap these highlights over the darker areas. Now when you have a nice base, start blending it lightly using your finger, just like the way I'm doing here. Now it's time to add another layer of highlights, and this time I'm keeping the angle a bit higher than the previous one and adding these thin highlights very carefully. Now as we move towards the left side, the texture changes a bit, so I am adding these small dots of random sizes here. Okay, so now let's add life to the tear duct portion, and for that I'm highlighting the required portion using circular scribbling motions. Notice that I'm only adding these highlights onto the lighter portions and will blend it afterwards. Okay, so now it's time to make this area shiny and watery, and for that we need brighter highlights. So I'm adding this curved stroke right in the center of the darker portion. I'm also adding these small dots of random sizes here and there. And look how shiny it has started to look, just like the way we want it here. I'm slightly adjusting the brightness of this Sclera in between the highlighting process. Okay, so now let's add those eyelash hairs, and I'm starting from the inner corner of the eye. I'm firstly adding these slightly curved strokes facing downwards. I'm placing my pencil from where I want to start the hair stroke and then gradually flicking it downwards to achieve the required stroke. When adding lashes from the inner corner to the center of the iris, keep in mind that they start short and fine, curving slightly downward. Use a flicking motion. Press a little harder at the base, then quickly lift your pencil to taper the ends. As you move toward the center, lashes become longer and curve more visibly. Add some overlapping strokes and keep spacing slightly irregular. This helps avoid a stiff, artificial look. You can also blend the base of the lash line lightly to give it some shadow and depth, before sharpening the tips again if needed. When the first layer of downturned lash hair is done, now it's time to add some longer and curved hair in between the previous ones. And for that, I'm placing my pencil from where I want the stroke to start, and then flicking it upwards in a curved motion. And look how beautiful the stroke turned out. I'm carefully adding these strokes but slightly farther apart to achieve realistic results. When I have the hair strokes, now I am again going over them lightly and then blending them using the tip of my blending stump a bit. This will give them some more dimension and depth. Due to blending, the highlights seem a bit dull to me, so I'm going around the lash strokes to achieve the required texture. Okay, so now let's move on to the most interesting and intricate part, which is the veins texture in the Sclera. And without it, the Sclera will not look as realistic as we are aiming for. So let's start by adding these wavy strokes. I'm keeping the pressure variable to achieve crisp strokes at some portions and softer ones at others. This will give us a very irregular stroke, which is perfect for this type of texture. To achieve a realistic web-like texture of veins in the Sclera, use soft, wavy strokes that branch out irregularly. Start light and short, varying pressure as you go, and let some of the lines fork or fade naturally into the white base. Avoid drawing them too straight or evenly spaced. They should feel like tiny threads under the surface. To enhance realism, add a few slightly darker veins to suggest depth, and mix in faint, almost invisible ones in between. When we have laid all the veins texture, I am lightly dabbing my finger over these veins to gently blend them in with the Sclera. Without this soft blending, the veins can look like they're just sitting on top of the surface. After light dabbing, they blend in beautifully with the rest of the texture. Okay, so moving on to the right side, and I'm extending the upper eye fold stroke till the 5.5 inch marking, keeping the angle of my pencil very low. I'm also adding this curved stroke to define the lash line, just like the way we did earlier for the left side. When the upper portion is traced, now I'm adding this arc for the lower lash line as well. Now it's time to add a base layer, and I'm following the similar method of using variable pressure to fill in the charcoal layer. I'm keeping the pressure relatively high while filling the sclera, as less light is reaching this side, making it darker compared to the left side. And when you have a decent base, start blending it using a bigger size blending stump. Now add the base in the upper portion of the eye too, using the same technique we followed earlier for the left side, and blend it afterwards. Okay, so now we have a base. Now it's time to add some more dimension. And as always, I'm adding a layer of white pastel in this lighter portion. In between the darker ones, I'm moving my hand in back and forth motions and filling the area, keeping the pressure low. I'm also adding this layer of white pastel in the sclera, but using circular scribbling motions here. Now it's time to blend all this in, and I'm using a clean side of my blending stump. Avoid using the dirty side to blend such lighter portions, or else the charcoal stuck on it will transfer to the lighter area, making it look dark and patchy instead of light and smooth. I'm switching the side of my blending stump and using the dirty one to adjust the darker areas in between the blending process. I'm adding another layer of white pastel in this area near the iris to achieve the required lightness, and blending it afterwards using my finger. For that subtle blend on the lid portion, I'm using my finger to blend the white we added earlier. And look how beautiful the base has started to look. Okay, so now it's time to add a skin texture, and I'm following the similar method of moving my hand in small back and forth motion, using a white pastel pencil. I'm keeping the pressure high in the start and gradually decreasing it as I move towards the right side, to achieve that smooth, blurry look. I'm going back and forth to adjust the details where required. Now it's time to add the lashes, and I'm firstly adding these small slant strokes facing downwards for the base of the lashes. And then starting from this base stroke, I'm flicking my pencil up to achieve a curved stroke. As we move toward the outer corner of the eye, the lashes naturally grow longer, more curved, and also start to angle outward. Make sure your stroke direction gradually shifts. Start more downward near the center, then flick more diagonally as you go out. Also vary the spacing. Place some lashes close together in little clusters and leave slight gaps in between others to keep the texture natural and realistic. Using a sharp pencil and maintaining steady flicks will help you get cleaner, more believable lashes. When the strokes in this portion are done, I'm again going over them to define them a bit more. For the rest of the lashes, I'm following the similar method of adding the base downturned strokes first, of small length, and then topping the area off with curved longer strokes very carefully. Make sure to keep the length of these strokes random and add some in clusters to achieve a realistic texture. Also, don't forget to change the direction of these strokes gradually as you move towards the outer corner of the eye. I almost forgot to blend this upper eye fold, so I'm doing it now using a bigger size blending stump. The veins texture on the right side of the sclera is the same as the left side, so I'm following a similar technique here to achieve the required results. The only difference here is that I'm adding relatively darker strokes, as this side has more prominent veins. Use a sharp pencil and vary your pressure slightly within each stroke. Let some veins trail off softly while others stay darker and more defined. You can branch a few of them from one another to mimic that tangled, organic look. The key is randomness. Nothing too clean or predictable. And don't hesitate to go over some veins twice if they need more contrast against the sclera base. I'm also adding the missing lash strokes and depth to give the area some final touches. Moving on to the lower portion of the eye, and I'm adding this curved stroke starting from the 3.5 inch marking on the y-axis and extending it upwards to create a curved shape. I'm extending this stroke towards the left as well. I'm also adding more strokes below the first one to achieve the required stretched skin base. Okay, so now it's time to shade this area and I'm filling it thoroughly, keeping the pressure low. And now to create depth, I'm layering more charcoal and increasing the pressure this time. But notice that I'm leaving this space for the teardrop. Okay, so now it's time to blend this layer, and as always, I'm using my bigger size blending stump. I'm going over the darker area first by moving my hand in back and forth motions and then going over the lighter portion with a clean side. Okay, so now it's time to add the lighter base, and for that I am firstly adding this curved stroke on the waterline using a white pastel pencil. Here I am keeping the angle very low to achieve a bright top edge and a blended lower edge. Now it's time to tone down the teardrop, and for that I'm firstly defining its shape and now filling it in, keeping the pressure high at the bottom and gradually decreasing it as I move upwards. I am layering more pastel over the bottom portion to achieve a 3D base. Okay, so now let's blend it, and I'm using my clean tip blending stump. For this bottom portion, I'm using my finger to achieve that subtle, smooth blend. I'm also going over the waterline with my finger to achieve the required results. Okay, so now it's time to add the skin texture, and I'm using my white pastel pencil and adding these strokes using a mixture of back and forth motions and circular scribbling motions. This will give us the required texture base, perfect to add brighter skin texture and highlights over it. But make sure to add these strokes slightly curved in the direction of the lower lid to give it a natural look. When the first layer of texture is in place, start blending it using your finger. Don't press too hard with your finger, or else it will start to pick up the charcoal instead of blending it in, making the area patchy and uneven. The water droplet has started to look less bright to me after adding the skin texture. So I'm again going over it and creating this perfect gradient, then blending it afterwards using my finger. Okay, so now it's time to add the bright skin texture. And I'm starting from the inner corner and adding these strokes of random size and thickness. I'm also using small circular motions in between to achieve a natural texture. I'm changing the pressure on my pencil to achieve a mixture of brighter and softer strokes. The softer strokes will give us an illusion that they are at the back, while the brighter ones will look like they're at the front. I'm also blending some of the strokes in between the layering process to give the texture a 3D look. Keep on adding these small dots and strokes of random sizes until you are satisfied with the texture. I'm also adjusting the depth of these strokes to give the creases a more natural and prominent look. I'm repeating the similar process of adding lighter texture and highlights using a white pastel pencil for this right side as well. The only difference here is that I'm adding these thin yet intricate strokes of longer length to mimic the peach fuzz and skin texture. Okay, so now it's time to add the lower lashes. Lower lashes are generally finer, more delicate and slightly curved. Start from the inner corner using short, light strokes facing slightly downward. As you move outward, gradually increase the length and curve of your strokes, just like the natural flow of lower lashes. Avoid placing them too close or at the same angle, as that can make them look artificial. Randomize the spacing slightly and group a few strokes to keep the texture believable. Using a sharp pencil helps maintain clean tips, and layering lighter strokes with occasional darker ones can add depth. As I move towards the teardrop, I'm increasing the pressure on my pencil and adding these slightly thicker and darker strokes, and now lowering the pressure as I move away from the teardrop. Now let's make those lashes stand out even more, and for that, I'm adding these small dots and strokes in between the darker hair strokes using a white pastel. And look how they pop up the whole look of it. This top left portion has a bright highlight, so I'm cleaning the base first so that the white can pop the brightest using my electric eraser. I'm also shading the lower portion of the teardrop to give it more dimension. I'm also adding these smaller thin strokes and highlights here and there to give the area more detail. I'm also highlighting the waterline from this center portion to give it a shiny, wet look. Okay, so now let's add some depth under this bright highlight, and it will make it pop even more. As this is a very intricate area, I'm using my small blending stump and blending it carefully. And with this last step, we are done with this super easy and interesting eye drawing. Creating these free tutorials needs a significant amount of time and energy. So if you found this one valuable, please show your support by liking the video. Your support keeps me inspired to bring you more creative content. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.